We are now going to have our last panel of today, but before we have the panel, we'll have some scary messages, which will be shown on video. It will start in a minute.
On the golden shores of Hawaii lives one of the most prolific hackers on the planet.
Everybody has hobbies. Mine's hacking. I've personally hacked just about every major company and bank on the planet at one time or another.
At the age of 22, Jeremiah Grossman hacked Yahoo, one of the biggest tech companies in the world. In response, they offered him a job, Yahoo's chief hacker.
There's a vernacular in the industry. There's the white hat hackers and then there's black hat hackers. The way I like to describe it is kind of like Star Wars, where you have the Jedi and the Sith. The skills are the same, but one uses their powers for good and the other one's for evil. I'm more of the white hat variety. I use those skills to prevent other people from getting hacked. There's people all over the world attacking you, and you have to remain calm and steadfast at every point, because if you lose control, you will lose the battle.
White hat hackers break into computer systems to find the weaknesses and make companies aware of them. But it's about to get even harder to keep up the defenses.
The threats in 2018 will change in terms of their scale. It's the same amount of effort to hack 1 million people as it is 100 million people. The bad guys aren't necessarily innovating, they're scaling.
With an ever-increasing risk to corporate security, 2018 will see an unlikely savior in the fight against hackers: insurance companies.
So next year, I think one big change will be lots more companies will start taking up cyber insurance. So like any other kind of insurance, if I have home insurance and I choose to live on a floodplain, it's going to cost me a lot of money.
Insurance is not a sexy topic. The reason the hacks keep happening is not because we don't know how to defend them, that we don't have the right technology or know-how. There's not always the best motivation for them to fix the issues in a timely manner. People should care about cyber insurance because if they're expecting things to get better, if they want organizations to take this problem seriously, insurance has the best chance of being a lever for improvement. It has incentives. So when an insurance company tells their clients that you must secure the data like this, they will, or their premiums will spike. That's how it's going to affect the everyday person.
But cyber insurance can only go so far when we are all becoming vulnerable to attack. More and more of our everyday lives are being hardwired to the internet, from the lock on our front door to our heating. Being connected may bring convenience, but it also makes our homes and our personal lives more vulnerable to hackers.
I think next year you might start to see it become a sort of water cooler talking point. The more the hacks happen, the more people get used to the idea that increasingly everything in the world is computerized. There might even start to be a backlash against this idea, and people saying, well, do I really need a computerized fridge? Do I really need my toaster talking to the internet? There was a casino in America recently which suffered a big data breach by hacking into an internet-connected fish tank and then jumping from there to more sensitive bits of the network. The companies that aren't taking security seriously now are going to come to regret it in the future.
The future for the cyber threat beyond 2018 is more than just privacy and monetary loss. Before, somebody would break into your bank account or assume your identity and steal your money.
National transport networks, railways, which are controlled by computers now, the signalling systems that people use on motorways and so on. A lot of this infrastructure is connected to the internet.
Now with connected cars, connected energy grids, connected pacemakers, where everything in life is going to be connected to the internet, we suffer the very real risk of loss of life.
I already warned you this was going to be quite scary. I think we're all in need of protection, and we're going to discuss the issue of cybersecurity insurance with a panel of experts whom I welcome. To start, on my immediate right, Eduardo Dávila, who is the CEO of Iberia and Middle East of Aon Risk Solutions. Next to him, very welcome, Norma from Mexico. Norma Alicia Rosas Rodríguez. She is president of the Supervisory Authority in Mexico. welcome here. Next to her, Mamiko Yokoi-Arai, Principal Administrator and Head of Insurance of the OECD in Paris. Next to her, of course, Nathalie Berger. I don't need to present her. She did a wonderful job on her panel. And then, last but not least, of course, Andries Smit, who is Managing Director, Global Digital Factory and Asia Digital of Aviva. And he's actually the only gentleman on this panel who took the very special decision, because we talk about cyber, I won't wear a tie. Congratulations, sir. So, dear panelists, we have discussed already this morning the fact that the penetration on cybersecurity insurance is very low. And I would like to hear from all of you, what are the reasons why that is? And then we'll go on from that. So starting with you, what do you think, why is there so little take-up of insurance?
Thank you for the question, but I need to start saying that I completely wrong with the dressing, seeing the hacker, so let's try to be as sexy as possible, at least the answer. So I think you're absolutely right. This is in a world of volatility and where everything is changing so fast, I think cyber risk is a nice topic. We in Spanish say, I like to say instead of ciberriesgo, ciberretos, which is, let's say, translated into English, kind of cyber challenge. So I don't see this, because we like to tend to use challenge linked with opportunity, not just with the downside of the meaning. So, but it's a journey. And I think that starting from lack of understanding, lack of knowledge, starting from us probably, I think this is one of the reasons for the low penetration. It's very important as well that normally people tend to identify cyber risk with an IT issue, and it's a corporate issue. It's not an IT issue. So this link with who are you talking with, who are you selling this into the companies? And sometimes we, ex-brokers now in the way to be professional services firms, adding value, not just transaction to our clients, I think that's very important, who do we talk with? And the higher we go in the hierarchy, C-suite ideally, we can talk the same language, because this is something that is affecting the P&L, something that is affecting the balance sheet, and it's the intangible that we are trying to secure. It's not just the tangible that we used to do it in the past. So this mix of ingredients, I think, that makes this salad pretty special.
Okay, we'll talk in a minute about what we can do about it. Norma, what's, from your perspective?
Okay, from my, and thank you very much, first of all. And I'm very happy to be here with these experts. And I can say that maybe there are many reasons, but it's something that is new, it's something that is changing most of the time. And I think that companies, for the companies, it's not clear that they are exposed to this kind of risk. In some cases, when they have this cyber risk, maybe they didn't know this. So it's very strange, because if they don't know that they have a cyber attack, and maybe they say, well, one of our PCs is not functioning. Well, the IT people comes and try to review the specific PC. So I think that is something that we need to understand better. And also, I consider that the companies that have a risk management established doesn't have a cyber risk management, and they didn't know the risk. They don't have experts to monitor, to try to measure how many times the hackers have entered into the machines or into the systems. So we think that it's something that is more cultural, and the low penetration, maybe when we talk with some companies or with the people, they say, the cost is very high. Yeah. Well, what cost? Because you haven't answered, you haven't asked for your particular needs, because you don't have data, you don't have measured this risk, so it's not a cost. Okay. So.
Mamiko, you did at the OECD a big conference about cybersecurity insurance.
Yes.
So what was the people's conclusion about why is there such a low
Right.
take-up of insurance?
So I think the biggest issue, and I think before we even get to the point of why people aren't buying insurance, is because even insurance companies are not exactly sure what their coverage is. This is a particular problem in Europe in which even for their standard property or liability policies, there's a lot of silent, what we call silent coverage, in that there's a lot of uncertainty of what is actually being covered. And that was actually one of the big issues, as well as the lack of quantification. Just because of the data, the loss data is just not there to have a historical idea. And even if you talk to any of the modeling companies, they will not be able to quantify and create risk models because, as was already mentioned by Eduardo, the risk is evolving so quickly. There was talk about WannaCry. We thought that there was not going to be a problem with Microsoft as long as you're doing the updates. Now that has been realized, and the risk is just changing constantly, that there is not enough data to actually back it up and create a quantified model that gives assurance to the insurance companies that they're underwriting on a basis that is sound.
Nathalie, in the Commission, is that something that people have been starting to talk about?
Yes, not only starting. We are doing a lot of work on this. We have adopted recently an action plan on fintech, and we are trying to tackle the issue of cyber risk. I would say that I would look at this question from a twofold angle. I mean, the perspective of the potential client and the perspective of the insurance industry, if I may. And of course, some of you may have different views. From the client's perspective, I would see 4 different types of reasons why there is under coverage or under subscription of cyber risk insurance. The first one, which was already mentioned, is that the potential buyers often do not understand cyber risk, or they do not understand or they do not know enough about their insurance options. Second one is that cyber risk may be spread over a wide range of different types of coverages. So it may be included in different types of products, such as general liability, property, professional liability, business interruption, crime policies, amongst other types of standard coverages. And of course, this complicates the efforts to assess the coverage needs, to match the policies with the exposures, and to compare alternatives. The third reason may be a lack of standardization in the cyber policies, that typically the description of coverage terms, conditions, and exclusions are anything but standardized in the cyber policies. And the fourth one is that the legal landscape remains quite flu. If one event could be covered under multiple policies from different types of carriers, and if the policy language isn't entirely clear or standardized, there might be some kind of conflicts which may trigger possibly settlement disputes. So this might potentially hinder an efficient claim management. Now, if I may add, maybe why we see for the moment not that major an offer from insurers of cyber insurance products, we also see different types of reasons there. First of all, maybe the lack of historical data, which makes it difficult to build predictive models that can assess or that can help assessing the predictability of the loss. Secondly, the fact that cyber attacks keep evolving, so I understand it may be difficult for the insurers to feature the right insurance policy. Thirdly, the potential catastrophic accumulation of events, which of course will impact the situation of the insurer, and maybe some tunnel vision in the coverages which could be offered for the moment, and this is very understandable, a narrow vision or narrow view of what constitutes cyber risk, because we today still do not always understand what cyber risk is about.
Okay.
So many, many reasons.
Many, many reasons. Now, Andries, you are the man on the job. Why is there no penetration? Why are you not selling more insurance for cybersecurity?
I think I look at your question as a bit of an onion, which we need to peel.
Yes.
I think the panel has done a fantastic job so far in giving us many, many reasons. So I'll try and just add a few. I think from a customer's perspective, there's some basic stuff here. This is new, so there's an adoption curve which we need to go through. From a large institutional customers, at Aviva, we've been investigating cyber insurance for the last 18 months, and we've ran various different pilots. And it's quite interesting, when you speak to the institutional customers, the only one that really understands the risk is the CIO. But the CIO's job has always been to stop the cyber risk from happening. So to buy insurance is almost in claiming that he's not good at his job. So there's an interesting thing there, and to the earlier points around, it has to now go to the C-levels, it has to go to the boards to really get some traction in the large institutions. A second category of customers, so the smaller businesses, we spoke to over 3,000 small companies, anything from taxi providers to man-in-vans to online merchants. And it's quite interesting, when we speak to them, we pick up on two themes. The one is, oh, you mean I'm not covered for this in my normal insurance? So there's an expectation that these are just other risks that they would have, and they would have expected their insurance to cover it. And the other one is, actually, it's not so much about the money. The fear that they exist with is the technical expertise to help me get up. What do I do if WannaCry hits me, or I get a ransomware attack and there's suddenly 5,000 bitcoins that I need to pay? They feel a bit lost. So the topic in that segment is more around, how do I get help rather than insurance? The SMEs worry about one thing, and that's the money in the bank. And they, at least in the research we've done, the feedback has been they look to the banks to protect that. And then just to a last layer of the onion, if I may, is on the individual consumers. The feedback in the conversations we've had with them is that they just expect the tech companies to protect them. I expect my device, my software, my email, and so forth to just work and protect it. And if it does get hacked, then it would be able to be restored.
Very interesting points. I think we've peeled the onion. Let's now taste the onion and see how that comes over. And I want to ask the broker first. Are you having the feeling that the insurance industry is creative enough in this area? Are they doing enough? Because they say, I cannot quantify, I don't have historical data. But of course, when the world was created, when insurance was created, we didn't have historical data, so we had to develop products. Are these arguments sufficiently justified, or how do you see that?
Any broker in the panel? No, not enough. But this is probably the obvious question, the obvious answer. I think for all these various reasons, I think that the insurance has been used as the first line of defense of all these companies. I think that we as a platform of being, let's say, connectors between clients and markets, I think we have a word to say. That's why in our case, say a couple of years ago, we integrate Friedberg as a boutique of cyber, and we do quantification, which is absolutely critical, you mentioned before, because in the way of identification, quantification, risk transfer, or mitigation, there is a world of things that you can do. And it's our obligation to help our clients thinking, what do they need in order to protect the balance sheet and the volatility for their businesses? How can we help them, whether it's with new talent that need to understand the risk? Also from the carrier side, I think that to underwrite a risk, you need to understand it. So lack of data today, I think, is absolutely not an answer, because it means huge data. The way is, how do you interpret this data, and you are able to create an outcome that brings value to the equation, whether it's a client or whether it's ourselves. So I think it's also the value chain, how will affect the business and the business continuity. So I think we as consultants or trust advisors for our clients that need to be creative, innovative in saying what is the potential solution we can bring into the table. And probably then the insurer or our partners, carriers, will help us to make the omelette with the onion, but we need to also to bring the other ingredient to be more creative.
Okay, if we fry the onion a little bit more.
I like it.
Yes.
With
yes.
mayonnaise is perfect.
Yeah, onion is very good. Yeah. You can mix it with garlic; it's even better. But
We can discuss.
Yeah, but who is your contact person in the companies?
I always tend to think that we have a logo-to-logo relation. What is probably a vision, but it's not a reality. Every time I go to a client, we brokers, we were very bad in creating relations with the whole chain of the client and the client hierarchy. We can say, pick up a logo, and the relation between Aon and this client is normally go to the same person, different levels today, probably risk management, let's call it. Whilst now we're trying, especially with this kind of strategic issues that all the companies are facing, to create a different level of conversations. And we are also this platform. You mentioned the CIOs and the CISOs before. It's funny, we go to meetings that we introduce themselves. So we bring the CISO, we bring the risk manager, and we as Aon, as a consultant, introduce themselves. Because if they, internally there's a kind of competition. This is my piece, this is my silo. So this is about purchasing, pricing, something that we don't know, buying cheap, which is buying cheap is buying a potential huge claim probably. So we are creating this ecosystem and being the enablers to make these connections happen within the client hierarchy in order to escalate to the people that really understand the global strategy of cyber. Because I think it's very important to have a strategy of cyber strategy that will probably end up in a cyber insurance, but not starting from the product and from the product try to build a strategy, because I think this flow is the wrong answer.
Yeah.
I don't know if I reply.
Norma, you are the supervisor. Yes. What about the insurance companies that you supervise for themselves? Would you accept that an insurance company would not have a policy on cybersecurity, not be insured against it as part of that policy?
No, it's not possible. You know, we are, as supervisors, are always looking at the solvency of the companies. And in this case, it is very important that the insurance companies know very well what is the kind of risk that they are assuming, and also they have to diversify this risk. So they need also a very good reinsurer, and a very good and very qualified reinsurer. But it is very difficult to try to understand the risk that they are assuming, because I am in agreement with Eduardo, because we need to know the real risk that we are assuming. But it's not the problem is maybe not only the historical data, because this kind of risk is not going to be the same like in the past. So the forecast that we can do is quite difficult. And for me as a supervisor, the real problem is that maybe the insurers are not understanding the kind of risk that they are assuming. They are not measuring the risks in the proper way. And in this case, also the reinsurance contracts maybe can give some support, but they are also have a lot of exclusions in this kind of risk. So if there is a very huge problem also, because in most of the kind of the risks that the companies are assuming, we have a very strong assumption that is the independence of the risks. And in this kind of particular risk, if one hacker is going to one big, for example, a big bank, in the case of Mexico, last week we have an attack for the Bank of Mexico. And the problem was that there was an IT system that gave the support to all the banks in the nation. So there was not an independent risk. We have a lot of banks having these kind of problems, and they lose money. They don't want to say how much it was involved in this kind of risk, this cyber risk. But the actuaries cannot model the distributions of losses, because the independence assumption is not functioning. we have a very great correlation, and with this kind of great correlation, there is no capital that can support one insurance company. So we as supervisors want to have, we want to sleep well. So if we cannot sleep if this kind of risks are not well measured.
We don't want supervisors to sleep.
Yes.
You need to be all the time watchful in the interest of the policyholders. That is the main objective.
Yes. So it's also very difficult to try to prepare a contract.
I understand that. I'll come back to that. But I wanted to, Andries, you mentioned something very important, and it was the concept of help. Because suppose that I'm sitting in my computer, I'm writing my book, and suddenly I get hacked. And I have to act within a short period of time. Can the insurance industry provide a mechanism where clients can call in, it's called sort of an emergency help center, which is part of my policy or whatever, so that you can immediately send a squad of people that take whatever care that needs to be there? Is that something that you are working on? Does it exist?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's a bit bold to say we, as an insurer, has that capability. Being very smart people, we always try, and that's our starting position. But the good news is, in our pilots that we've run, we very quickly realized that actually that's just not possible. We're talking about a very, very technical world here, and you need to be available. Sure. So in our specific solution, we are partnering with two different companies. The first one is what we are calling a cyber health score. So without having to go and visit the company and specifically think about the small, medium enterprises rather than the big organizations that have their thousands and thousands of people on IT. But those 5-man, 10-man, 20 people, small businesses don't necessarily have that IT infrastructure. So there's a piece of technology as part of our solution which from a remote perspective, we run some diagnostics, see, like in the video, whether there's any penetration vulnerabilities, are there basic hygiene in terms of email management and those kind of things secure, and we give them a score, and we give them a report which says these are your vulnerabilities. And back to the earlier point, that also solves some of our pricing and underwriting challenges. We have an indication, it's not perfect, but we have a clear indication of where there are obvious larger risks and so forth. So that's the one. The other one is, at the same time, we also then give them some computer-based training, basic things. We always think, hacks and cyber vulnerabilities are these glamorous things where it's, fishbowl machines that pop into casinos. But actually, 80–90% of the risk is how your employees manage their passwords. Do they stick them on the screen? Do they tell them to people? It's basic stuff. And what we found is that computer-based training goes a long way in just nudging behavior a little bit.
So that's prevention, basically.
Absolutely. Yes. And then the last one on your specific question is we then partnered with a separate company who specializes in cyber advice. So you come to your screen in your analogy, who do I call? Here's one number, 24/7, technical experts that can then guide that customer through, do I pay this ransomware or not? Of course, we won't give them advice on that, but just structurally, how do you do if that message hits you in the face, or I've now lost all my email, or my money is gone? Where do I go? How do I even claim?
So you won't give advice on whether they have to pay the ransom?
What we as Aviva have taken the stance on in our pilot is, of course, we're not going to advise the customer whether they should or shouldn't support that activity. However, in the situation where they do pay or ended up paying, then we will still make good on that claim.
Okay. If you move then to the regulatory side, because obviously if there is no pickup, for whatever reason, we have analyzed that, maybe the regulators need to get active and say, okay, you've got to do something. Now, Mamiko, what was the conclusion in your conference? Should regulators do something, and what should they be doing?
Yes, I think the very good example is the Bank of England's supervisory statement that they put out, I think, last year, and that they ask their insurance companies to clarify their cyber coverage that they have. So basically, that I think they would have to submit their coverage that they perceive to have probably in the coming few months. And that brings them to a situation in which they may need to actually carve it out of their property and liability policies or not. But it also gives them clarity about what they're actually exposed to. And I think that has been a very interesting and very good, positive exercise. And my understanding is that in the UK, it has been a very positive exercise for the insurance companies as the regulatory authorities. But the part that I think the European conversation comes in is obviously there's a cross-border aspect, because as a result of the carve-out happening, there is a risk, especially for corporate clients, to want to go to another European, because they may get a better coverage that includes the exclusion from the UK policies, because in the European continent, they are still primarily still included as a combined package at the moment. So that was one of the concerns that the Bank of England had, and I understand that they are reaching out to a number of supervisory authorities to see if they can also carry out some clarification of their cyber coverage in the traditional policies. And that is something very positive, I think, and could lead to better clarity within the insurance companies, as well as in terms of the supervisory understanding of what their insurance companies are actually exposed to as well. So that was one of the conclusions that did come out of the conference. The other is obviously policy clarification, because as Nathalie mentioned, there's a lot of uncertainty about the terminology, and this comes from two industries coming together around this. This is the digital security industry, and then the insurance, and there are two communities, and for example, we're calling it cyber insurance, but I think a more security-based person will call it digital security. And so even some of the basic terminology is different, and one of the very useful activities that has happened in recent years is the CRO Forum has put together a data sort of terminology about the loss and incident classification. So that sort of activity helps, and I think supervisory authorities need to encourage that to happen, because once the classifications are clarified, then the data collection becomes much more straightforward, and that can lead to actually some of the accumulation of historical data as well.
I think that's very interesting. It's regulation through disclosure, and disclosure brings then action by the regulated entities.
Yes.
Nathalie, when are we going to see such a requirement from the Commission?
Are we really calling for more regulatory action from the
More
European
protection,
Commission?
more protection.
More protection. Well, we're looking into this, and we are working and committed to work on the issue of cyber risk at international level, because then the next question is, what is the right level for action? We need international cooperation on this, and we are also taking action internally. So we have announced a range of action in our action plan on fintechs, and we will continue to work on this. I would like to come back to what Andries said on your experience of what you offer in terms of help, ICT, and in terms of guidance regarding the governance, because there is much that one can do in order to face a cyber risk, which has nothing to do with the regulatory framework, but with good reflexes and good reactions from the person in front of the IT device. So there are a number of things that we are undertaking, or that we are committing that we are going to do. We are indeed going to map the existing supervisory and regulatory practices around ICT security and governance requirement, and that's of course to see whether there is something that we could do at European level. We will ask the European supervisory authorities to evaluate the costs and the benefits of developing a coherent cyber resilience testing framework for EU significant market participants and infrastructure. And we will encourage sufficient information and intelligence sharing among financial markets participants. And in this regard, we are organizing a seminar in June, I think, with market participants to precisely discuss the topic of intelligence and data sharing amongst market participants.
Very interesting. It's good to do the groundwork before you start to regulate. I think that makes a lot of sense. Norma, I do understand that, I think it was in the state of New York, that there was a requirement that each insurance company should have a cybersecurity officer that was introduced. Is that something that you think is a good idea?
I think it's important to have a cybersecurity officer. However, it is quite difficult, like a regulator, for example. We cannot, like an insurance regulator, we only have to establish rules for the insurers, not for all the companies, neither for the insured companies or insured enterprises. So I think it's important to understand the kind of risk that the companies are facing, but this figure maybe also is very costly, and I don't know if it could be very effective. I can mention that maybe we have to begin like regulators or like the politicians with another kind of measures that can have a huge impact in the society. For example, and we have introduced, and I know that in the United States have introduced also another kind of legislations, and also in Europe, to protect the private data.
Yes.
For
GDPR.
For the people. So I think that we can begin with that, but also if we try to improve the information sharing, if we improve the disclosure, if some of the companies have a very important breach of information, if they have some problems with a hacker, they have to disclose this kind of data. And also, we have established, in the case of my country, we have established a nation regulation, not only for the financial system, in order to share this kind of information, in order to disclosure, but because we have a systemic impact for the financial sector if we have this kind of breaches.
Okay. What I wanted to ask you also is there some kind of a draft or model policy that Aon has developed for cybersecurity insurance?
It's very, as we are talking, doing something across the board, it's very difficult and complex because every company has it's a very tailor-made product, especially depending on segmentation. Yes, we can do something probably as a facility for the very small companies with a very similar 80% risk they are facing, but the higher you go in the scale and in the complexity, in the international, how big the company, depending on the business, not necessarily the size, it can be very complex to do something that we all agree that is very much tailor-made and new. So doing something that is just all across the board is probably, I think, is not the right answer.
Andries, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. Again, segments of customers. I think on the large customers, they tend to want bespoke coverage anyway, and there's quite a huge process of underwriting involved. But on the SME front, we have, and we specify it around specific covers, so loss of a business or business income. You're down, you've had a denial of service attack, suddenly your website goes down, we cover you for that. We also cover you for liability, so if something happens, there's a penetration, they steal some of the data, and you are liable at the back of that, as well as if there is any breach of services. So you had responsibilities in the contracts to others. Fines and penalties is always an interesting one, which comes up in the debates, and whether that is being covered, that is one we are not covering at the moment, but we are investigating as to how that should work.
There's a question from the audience about potential hacking of governments, which unfortunately also happens. And the question is, should there be a cooperation between governments and the insurance industry to deal with these issues, and how can this work? Maybe it's a good question for the OECD.
Yes.
Because you work with governments.
Yes, we do work with governments. I think one of the, a good easy example is actually, as it was mentioned in the video, is actually critical infrastructure. And so there has been a lot of cases in which critical infrastructure, and I think the US is one of the good examples. I think Atlanta's city system was taken over for quite a number of days. The energy grid is said to be, was hacked by supposedly Russian hackers. And so this is an area which absolutely requires some investigation. But whether insurance companies can actually cover the losses as a result of that is a little bit of a separate issue. However, I do think that the areas in which the insurance industry and the governments can cooperate is actually in what for example, NISA, which is a European information security agency, is promoting, is actually the creation and development of strategies towards security. And we have advocated with NISA that perhaps inclusion of the use of insurance to actually at least cover your financial losses could be a way to support the development of a strategy. And so that's one area in which we have been in discussions with NISA as well as other parts of the OECD that deal with the digital security side, because it seems to make sense, simply.
Very good. There is another question from the audience, is whether cybersecurity is insurable. I think the answer is probably yes, it is insurable, but under certain conditions. What do you think?
Well, I was actually, thank you for the question first, because it's something I was trying to build for the closing, which is, we need to understand, when we start from the product and say, can I insure this glass, depending on the price, no? So if the price, if it's something attractive for me, I probably insure the glass. If you're trying to charge me the full price of the glass, I probably won't, because I buy another glass. So the thing is, we don't know the price. We placed in UK the biggest, I think, limit was 500 million recently. 500 million, we don't know if it's enough. This is the capital that we have. So the claim, we never know. So we see more and more clients going through the identification, quantification, making the strategy, because in my view, I don't know if in 2 years' time we will be talking about cyber as a product or cyber as a part of the strategy of a company. Probably I'm more in favor of this one, because you have to make a decision whether this is how much of this quantification, how much of this risk can I retain in my balance sheet. Then I would probably try to insure the X layer or something that I cannot support myself. So whether the pricing, you don't have enough data in the past to quantify this or to put the price for the glass. So at the end, I think this is very early stages, and we are very much, I think, the community, very much talking about the product, talking about the insurance product instead of the insurance need. And we're trying to do with clients is understand the business appetite, what is the potential risk that they're facing, quantify this, and they make a strategy with them to probably not necessarily insure, but they're worried about the reputation. The pre, I think we can do a lot of things in the pre. Not sure that we can do something in between, but we can do a lot of things after as well. So the pre and the after putting together, I think, will be much more our work with clients, because now it's happening somewhere. Probably we don't even know an attack. So it's tomorrow that we will probably face these difficulties. So fascinating.
Andries, should we include such a kind of protection in other types of policies, or do you think there should be a special policy dealing with that risk?
I think it depends on the customer segment. As I mentioned earlier, our smaller, medium enterprises, the ones we tested, actually just wanted one and done. I don't want another policy. Whereas the larger customers said specifically, I want to be very, very clear as to what is and isn't covered. So I think that's true. I just want to add on to what Eduardo just said. So is this coverable? I think there's one additional thing, which is in the claims process. When the way the team talks about it, I thought it was lovely. They keep comparing small business cyber insurance to I have a physical shop versus I have a virtual shop. And then that's the same exposures you have. The one is just tangible and the one is not. The point I'm trying to make is how you validate the claim. If somebody's broken into my shop, you can send somebody and they could see the door and they could see the window. How do you do that when it's a virtual or a digital shop? And as an insurer, we don't either have the capabilities or the supply chain to go back with that validation. And I think that's another prerequisite. If we really want to insure this, and the way we solved it was to partner.
Can I add just very quick? Because it's very physical. This example is very good. So if something happened in your physical shop, I mean, you see what happened and you can react, whilst, I mean, not probably working in the pre and in the post because you are in the between. But when you are in the virtual game, as mentioned before, you are not in the between. You can do things before, put it an alarm, whatever you can protect your shop. And then you can do things after for the chain. For example, use the other door or go to the other shop that I have an agreement. So you are working in the pre and the post, whilst in the physical world we're working in the ongoing action. So it's very good. I like the metaphor.
But is this area not an area that's relatively easy because cybersecurity happening in the US or in Europe or in Africa or in Asia or Latin America is the same. It's a cyber attack. So basically you could write an international policy, kind of a model policy. Would that be possible? Do we need a European policy, a British policy, a German policy?
I think that maybe the example of the standalone policies that do exist for cyber risk and don't exist actually are a good indication for this question. So I think the standalone policies that are, the coverage is very limited are IP theft, reputational risk, and physical damage. And so these are the three areas which, because of the uncertainty of the valuation, it becomes very difficult because you cannot say that my industrial secrets were stolen and I need to cover them, and because of that my profits were lost, and so please pay me this amount of claims. That's almost impossible to do. So these are issues which are very much, I think, European and US, where there is a lot of IP sort of in the market and potentially it can be stolen. Where I think in Africa, for example, that sort of need, for example, IP theft may not necessarily be as high as some of the more developed markets. Reputational risk probably has a similar sort of tenor in that if you are, P&G, for example, you have a big reputation for being a company with A, B, and C, and if that's damaged for P&G, it might be a great loss. Whereas if you are a much smaller company, which has a regional base, the sort of value of your reputation might be a little bit different. And so I think that sort of reflects well with what standalone policies are not really readily available in the market and don't seem to be as insured as the other areas.
Very interesting. We are getting to the end of our panel, but before we close, a question to all the panelists. A very simple question. If I were to ask you, what should we do here, now? What would be your priority advice?
Run.
Run.
No.
It's a clear answer.
No, I think I think that we should be very much the awareness of the topic, the culture, and as we as an industry partner together in order to help our clients also in the education phase to realize how potential impact this huge new threat that we are facing can become an opportunity for the business. Because if you are someone that can demonstrate to your clients that you are well prepared for an attack, this is something that you can also differentiate you from the competitors. So I think not necessarily be scared, but just work as an industry for something that is new for us and for all of us.
So awareness building.
Awareness building,
yes.
yeah.
Norma.
Thank you for the translation.
Sorry.
Yes, I consider also this awareness business, but also I think the sharing information, and because it's important to know if what are the numbers, what are the cyber attacks in every kind of different industry. So
your advice is develop some mechanism where we share information so that we have the data, that we know more about what's really happening in the real world. Yeah.
Yes, I would echo what Norma said, because I think when we did our survey, one of the biggest issues was the lack of data for quantification. So I would echo that in terms of that's the primary thing. But the other thing I would sort of want to also raise is that the big corporates, I think we have less of a sort of problem. I think they have enough money to invest, whether it's for cybersecurity or whether it's for insurance, then they can actually make the choice. I think it's actually the coverage for SMEs, because this is the area that is really, really lacking in terms of the information, the risk awareness among the SMEs, as well as the potential to actually really assist them, because they will not have an IT department to actually help them. Whereas, as Andries mentioned, with the purchase of insurance, the vendors and the affiliated services actually come together with it, giving a lot more scope for SMEs to actually benefit from the insurance. So I think that is an area where more insurance companies should actually look into and seek the possibility of providing more sort of coverage and a more variety of products available to them too.
Would you include in that camp also private consumers?
Well, I think that's the big question, because that's an area where I have not heard a lot of actual insurance companies wanting to provide coverage, but that is obviously one of the other areas, because we know that there's been so many ransomwares.
Exactly.
I mean, I think this is like a high frequency but low sort of cost sort of area. So maybe that's why the insurance companies are not that interested as opposed to the corporate coverage. But obviously, again, as with SMEs, I think the individuals would also benefit a lot from having this coverage.
Would that not create the pool which we need to make something insurable? Nathalie.
Yes, I will also agree with the previous speakers. I think that at this stage we should focus on exchange of information in between financial market participants, exchange of intelligence in between them, and exchange with the regulators. And I think that we need to develop a complementary or mutually cooperative system of finding solutions to this issue. It is only by this, a low and, how should I say, a flexible, light manner, dialogue, that we will be able to move forward and bring the right response to this issue. And of course, for us, we also tackle this with a wider issue, which is the one of money laundering. And we have instruments at European level to fight money laundering. And then there is another even more worrying issue, which was not discussed yet, which is the issue of terrorism and cyber terrorism, where we all need to unite forces to fight against that.
Yeah, but that's a private-public partnership.
Exactly, it's a private-public partnership.
Andries.
The one thing I would say is dip your toe in. Just try it. And that's the approach we took at Aviva. We realized, well, we started off saying we know everything, we're going to create this policy, then we quickly realized we actually know nothing. We just gave it a go. We got in, we started talking to customers, we started talking to our broker partners, we ran a pilot, and you know what, the learnings was phenomenal. Of course, I do echo everything else about sharing and continuing the conversations and partnering, because that's the only way we're going to learn. And
I think this is brilliant. I was hoping that somebody on the panel would mention that, because I remember from the old days when somebody came to me and said, we cannot resolve that. I said, well, I hire another expert. Because indeed, trial and error, that's the way the world was built. And I think, ladies and gentlemen, that's maybe a good conclusion of this panel. There is something to do about cybersecurity insurance. We just have to get at it. So, ladies and gentlemen, join me in thanking the members of the panel for the contributions. Thank you very much.